With insulin, I can also imagine that it was like, this was probably measured like probably at a single time point and not with high frequency, so it'd be important to like measure insulin. I know it's not the easiest thing to measure, yeah, multiple times over time.
Okay. This next one is for Nurse Cindy. Nurse Cindy, how do you prevent constipation and get enough fiber on low carbs?
We got to poop.
I have a whole talk on that. How do you prevent constipation? First, you have to understand you don't need to go 3 times a day every day like when you're eating all that stuff. Well, lots of water, magnesium, plenty of salt, movement. There's we have this thing called a colonic trigger. I think about 6 times a day you'll feel that little urge that the colon goes, oh, time to empty out. And if you ignore it, if you don't like say, oh, I gotta go, I gotta sit down, then it's gonna be harder. But have you ever like felt like, oh, I really could go? Nope, I gotta call. So you need to take advantage of your body's natural peristalsis to get things out. But I would need to know what defined constipation. There's other things
There
like
was another question
IBS.
that was, do you need to eat a bunch of fiber? Or should you eat
Okay,
more fiber?
who knows what a beaver dam is? Who remembers the lying that's been, I'm not saying fiber's bad. Psyllium husk and all that stuff, that's fine. Do I need to feel compelled to have, I don't think lions get constipated. No. Anyway, I don't worry about it. I'm an inadvertent carnivore most days, and I'm fine as rain. But you're all different. Medications can make, if you don't pay attention, if you're not taking enough magnesium. What else? What else, Dr. L? What do you say?
I would agree, yeah.
Okay, good. I paid him to say that.
Yeah, I agree. Whatever Nurse Cindy says, I
I will say
And my
Dr.
wife.
Berry has a video on fiber. If you're worried about should you be eating a lot of fiber, he has a great video on it too.
Paul
That is Dr.
Mason.
Mason. Yeah.
Dr. Mason.
I will say personally, I used to overdose on fiber to keep myself regular, and it caused 7 years of chronic constipation.
It clogs up. Beaver dam, beaver dam.
So I'd get constipated, and I would take more, and then I would get constipated even more, and I would take more, and I would take more, and I'd take more, and it just had a complete opposite effect.
It's really important also to know that just because you're not pooping doesn't mean you're constipated.
Right, exactly.
If you're eating less junk comes out.
Yeah.
And so just getting used to a different schedule.
Right.
Again, constipation, you're going to have some other symptoms. You may be feeling sick. Your gut's going to be hard. You may have a hard time going when you do need to go. Just
Look up the Bristol stool chart. Google that. Honestly, you can grade your poop using the Bristol, and as long as anyway.
Likes to talk about food.
It's in my medical
Thank you,
school
Doctor.
lecture too, the Bristol.
Yeah.
This is like standard.
We're
Oh, the Bristol stool chart is in the GI section of the medical physiology that I teach, and it's like the gold standard. Like you kind of go by this, so it's like.
If you've got rabbit pellets, that's an issue, you know. I have disimpacted patients. I won't go there, but it's, yeah, you'll know. Don't worry about it. What do you want?
Okay, our next question is for Michelle Hall. This person had gastric bypass surgery 20 plus years ago. They're asking, how do I need to modify my nutrition intake to properly compensate for the damage done to my system?
Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question because most people who have gastric bypass have serious issues with red meat. And if you have to limit your red meat consumption, obviously you're going to have issues with iron deficiency. You're going to have to go through iron infusions, things like that. Every single person I know who had bypass within 5 years had to get iron infusions, and they usually go every 6 months to a year. So you just have to, it depends on you and how you are with food. If you want to come talk to me to give me a little bit more information later on, I will absolutely talk to you about it.
And it's procedure dependent. It depends on your bariatric surgeon, how much of your small intestines they bypass and how small they make your pouch. Because depending on that extra couple of inches, that's where most of our nutrients is absorbed. So your B vitamins are very important. There's a iron supplement called Slow FE. It's a very slow absorption of iron, so it gets past that and gets deeper down where you probably hopefully still have your receptors.
Our next question is for Coach Bronson. Endurance athletes have a red blood cell lifetime that's about half of normal people. How does this affect nutritional requirements?
Wow.
It's I don't think it's well proven. I think it's
No, yeah, I would say nutrition requirements are individual. Comparing what you may need, regardless of the length of how long your blood cells last or any of that kind of stuff, I think it's really, what are you trying to do? What's working, what's not working, right? What's the principle behind what you're trying to do? I'm trying to improve my performance, I'm trying to improve my life. So I eat this much protein, I eat this much fat, I eat this much carbs, that didn't work, that did work. What am I trying to do? What am I measuring? You guys are gonna hear some common themes. Any questions you ask me, you're gonna hear some common themes, right? What am I measuring? What am I trying to do? What's the context of where I'm trying to go? So I don't know if there's a specific way to answer that. I think, what are you trying to do? And are you evaluating and testing based on your experience, right? N equals 1. Basing something on what some paper or what somebody else says, hey, if you have this, this is what it means and this is what you should do. Guys, the science is great to help us stay on track and make sure we're doing things that make sense, but science doesn't mean you have to do that thing, okay? If that thing works for you, then you should probably do that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's variable too, because people like Sean Baker, who's carnivore, he has a higher A1C than we would expect. And the argument has been that his red blood cells stay around longer because he's so healthy and they're not rupturing. Some long distance runners can crush the red blood cells under their feet. They talk about that, and their red blood cells may not be around as long. So we're surprised. We see a lot of long distance athletes with high LDL cholesterol and high A1Cs. Part of it is because their body's kicking out a bunch of sugar for them to burn. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just depends on the patient, right? Looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, that's one of those instances where markers are just markers.
Yeah.
It's the markers there's a lot of markers, guys, right? If we just look at the medical side of things, there's how many things are on that chart, right? How many blood tests can you get? But then if we look at, am I getting stronger? Am I flexible? Am I coordinated? Am I balanced? There's a whole bunch of other things that are markers as well. How much lean mass do I have? We all know that lean mass is correlated with longevity. The less you have, the sooner you die. Is that considered a marker? Does it get checked? Do you check that? Right, in most clinics?
Yeah.
Most
clinics
do.
don't.
Most clinics
Yeah.
don't. Right, so there's a lot more to it.
The next question is, it looks like it's basically a seeking of balance for tracking, in regards to tracking. So this question is for Jessica, but also the doctors and the speakers that talked about tracking today. Importance puts emphasis on focusing on food, which is contradictory to taking your focus off of food in order to feel free. So what is a proper balance?
I think it changes over time. I know for me, because I had done every diet and everything over 41 years, it was important for me not to track when it came to my only rule for myself when I started, and if you're beginning, this is good, eat this, not that. That was enough.
Yeah.
Many of my clients who come to me who are looking to make a change, I still don't have them focus on the numbers. I have them send me pictures of their food. Somebody said someone else does that. So I can kind of get an idea and lead them down the right path, but it's a very temporary thing. So I think once you know what you're supposed to eat, and again, we're talking about tracking, again, taking a picture of your body versus stepping on the scale or doing like the Me 360 app where you can see where you've lost fat. There's different ways to track things without being obsessed with it.
And I think it depends on the person, right? Some people weigh themselves every day and they freak out because they didn't lose 10 pounds that day and they get so stressed and tense and worried they weigh themselves in an hour again. And other people use it as a marker and they realize there's going to be fluctuations up and down, so they go, okay, I just use that. So some people love a ton of information and other people get totally overwhelmed. And so I've had patients that, they'll see their sugars going up when they exercise and they worry about it. It's like your body's releasing that for you to burn it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that, So it depends why the markers are going up and down. And as an example, I have a patient, he went from 320 pounds to 316 pounds. Reversed his diabetes, came off all his meds, he's hugging me so happy. I was like, 4 pounds of weight loss. But what turned out is he had put on tons of muscle mass when he lost his visceral fat. So he lost 8 inches off his waist with 4 pounds of weight loss, right?
Wow.
So, but his whole metabolic health, he came off all of his meds, everything is great. His clothes are falling off him, but 4 pounds. Because we would look at that and say, I give up. So just realize our body composition is changing and muscle mass is changing.
And just to add 2 notes. One, what you're tracking doesn't have to be the same thing all the time. You can track your food in a season, you can track your thoughts in a season, you can track your movement in a season. What are you trying to do? Tracking is the how. What's the why for tracking? Awareness. As long as you're maintaining an awareness of where you are and where you're trying to go and your progress on that journey, that's the goal. So how you implement that yourselves is going to be completely different for every single person in the room, right? I may be at a point where tracking macros is not mentally healthy for me right now. So I'm going to track how I feel when I think about X. What's my response to this trigger? Where am I at today? Maybe for me, my tracking is my mental state. I don't worry about tracking food right now. When I can deal with that and get to a certain point, maybe then I'm ready to say, hey, what am I eating this week? And then move into another level. So the expectation of how we're defining tracking is completely individual to every single person in this room.
Right. This is really important because he said, why are we tracking? And then his answer was awareness. You may not have thought that, because what I find is a lot of people with tracking, say your weight on the scale, it's tied to one of those branches rooted in a lie that it's related to your value or your worth. And so if you're in a place where the scale is rooted in your worth, then it's not a good time to do it. But you can get to a place where you're free of that too once you've uprooted that, which is why it's different in different seasons.
And also tracking, if you're not going to do something about the information, is useless. Because I have a patient, she was doing great. She went out for a barbecue one day with her husband, and it was her favorite place. It was their anniversary or something, and she kept eating every bite. She's looking at her phone, freaking out, going, oh my gosh, she's stressing out. And her husband said, give me your phone, right? Or stop eating, because you're getting stressed out. Like, enjoy it if you're going to have it, right? So you have to realize there's a balance in that. So sometimes if you get that information, then you say, okay, next time don't get stressed out about it. Go, okay, I learned something today. I'm not going to eat whatever it is, make those changes.
Okay. Our next question is for Dr. Lenzkes. What do you think is the most important thing for a doctor to do to inspire life change in a patient?
Well, I think the most important thing is connecting. Like, once you connect and you're on the same team and you're not fighting, and so many people will come in and they'll go, oh my gosh, you're gonna be so mad at me, look at my sugars on Saturday. I was like, well, look at your sugars for Wednesday too, all those other days. What'd you do on Saturday? Did you learn something? So how do you, and what would you do next time? Oh, I'll do this and this and this. Okay, great, right? So I think that, just saying we're on the same team and we can't be militant. Life gets in the way. You go through a stressful day, something happens, we go back to those old coping mechanisms. So I think patience, is the big thing, saying, hey, I'm on your side, let's see what we have to do, how do we move forward, type thing.
Our next question is for Dr. Dom. Are there any clinical trials going on for type 1 diabetes that people can get involved with?
Yeah, there's a lot. With type 1 diabetes, I assume they mean with ketogenic diets and maybe, or ketone supplements. Dr. Brenda Lenzkes, who trained with Dr. David Ludwig at Harvard, has a clinical trial. I believe they're looking at, they're testing sort of this hypothesis that ketones can, more or less rescue the brain from symptoms of hypoglycemia. So adjusting your blood glucose with insulin in a very calculated way, and lowering blood glucose, and then giving ketone supplementation as a means to sort of rescue. This was very interesting to me because of the work that, and I think it was probably inspired to be done at Harvard because Dr. George Cahill did studies in the mid-1960s. It got published in 1967 where he fasted subjects for 40 days. So you can't get this approved by IRB nowadays. But they fasted subjects and then they administered 20 IUs of insulin to the subjects in a fasted state. And they were asymptomatic for hypoglycemia, with a millimolar concentration in the blood of like 18 to 20 milligrams per deciliter. That's like 1 millimolar. So these people, that they were fasted because they were keto adapted, and we did see that their ketones started to go down, so you couldn't, maintain that because when you inject insulin, it stops fat burning. And in the case of these subjects, they didn't have exogenous ketones back then. So they are, I think, what inspired this research is early work that was done by Oliver Owen and George Cahill at Harvard. And it literally rewrote the medical textbooks that ketones can be an alternative fuel for the brain. So, yeah. Yes, clinicaltrials.gov is the website. Just type in type 1 diabetes, diet, ketogenic diet, and then something should be there.
And it'll list the studies, it'll say who the investigators are they actively enrolling, so you'll be able to see where you need to live and all that stuff. So.
Exactly, yep.
So this next question is not for a specific person to answer, so whoever feels comfortable, but this is coming from a person with no existing health conditions. How does low carb affect sleep in the beginning and long term?
Yeah, no, I think I've seen remarkable, and I'm glad these questions are being asked because there's Tro around here somewhere. I saw him roaming around. Anyways, we were told on our podcast that we should lose our medical license for talking about the effects of ketogenic diet on mood. Right now, you see all these lambasting studies coming out saying, look, it's definitely beneficial. So there's decreased inflammation in the brain. And I think we go back to this whole thing, if we're stress eaters, once we're less stressed, if we have ketones floating around that give us peace, does that calm our nerves a little bit, the sympathetic overdrive? So I see a lot of people, like initially with fasting, some people, their sleep gets really, like it's so much energy, they wake up at 2 in the morning, they're ready to go, right?
Yep.
I do, that's what I do.
Yep.
But other people seem to get a new peace and calm. So a fasted state or a ketogenic state is calming, and that's why all religions over the history of man have done these things. Because you get a peace, and so you could focus on God and not be penance like we're doing now. Because you eat donuts one day and you try to fast the next day, you're going to be miserable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So and clinically, I've seen a lot of people's sleep gets better, their stress gets better, their attitude gets better, their relationship. Like I'll see couples and I'll say, "How's it going?" And the husband will look at his wife and think, "Oh, should I say this or not?"
Yeah.
Honey, you're so even now. You don't get as upset as you used to. And then she'll say, "What are you talking about?" Right? Right. So, but it is amazing to see that you're sleep in peace, because I think all this inflammation in our brain, where we're struggling with attention deficit disorder and all these other conditions, bipolar disorder, and we're seeing marked benefits with that. So when our mood gets better, we don't have to turn to food necessarily as our stress relief.
Does anyone on the panel have any opinion on devices like Lumen to track metabolic health? And is glucose tracking the same as insulin?
Wow, that's too.
No, that's a deep question. Well, insulin tracking is different than glucose.
I'm just going to say for the first part, it just depends on why you're tracking. Again, I've seen people chase numbers and and it's driven them crazy. I mean, people chasing a ketone number, they would get so upset because their ketones went down when they went to the gym because they used up some of the ketones instead of sitting there storing them, not using them, that they would stop working out. So it depends on why you're tracking the number, whether you should or not.
Bronson used to yell at me a lot about obsessing over ketones. I'm just saying.
Never yell.
Sternly.
Yeah, I think with the diet, the ketones are inversely proportional to insulin. So as they go up, insulin will go down. But the Lumen device, I tested it and it did not really predict my metabolic state, but I know there's different versions of it. I tested an early version. And then what was the question about? Oh, glucose monitoring and ketone versus insulin. Yeah, so it's all relative, right? If your glucose is improving, your average glucose via a CGM device is better than the average glucose, for example, in a hemoglobin A1C. So getting that, and if that improves over time, that will usually translate to lower insulin and better insulin sensitivity, almost always. Like we see that, in our trials. So I guess people, don't want to get an insulin measurement, but I think the important thing is it's important to know it, but you don't have to measure it as frequently. And if you want to spend money to get a CGM device, you can get them for like $40 to $50 from Costco or even cheaper. You can get, there's different websites where you can get a prescription and wear it for 2 weeks. That could be insightful and it'd be good to maybe get an insulin test around that time and then later on seeing how things change.
And I would say when we're looking at, this is why it's important, when we're looking at the sugar readings, we're seeing what the sugar's doing, but that's a marker of what the insulin's doing. So if you eat a cookie and your sugar goes super high, we know the insulin has to go up to get rid of that extra sugar. If our goal is to lower the insulin level, that's not helping us. But if you wake up in the morning, your sugars are high, is that bad? Well, if you slept well, your insulin's the lowest it's gonna be in the morning, first thing. You've been fasting all night while you're sleeping, believe it or not. People who say they don't fast, yeah, you do, because you're not eating, hopefully, all night while you're sleeping. So we're gonna see that lower insulin as a reflection, we see the sugar go up. So as an example, I have one of my patients, he had just finished doing a liquid weight loss when he came to me. He had already lost 50 pounds. And every time I didn't realize what was happening, but I was seeing his sugars drop on Saturday morning and then drop on Saturday morning. The third Saturday, they went crazy high. I said, what the heck did you, he called me, so I'm concerned, look at my sugars. I said, what'd you do? He said, I was riding my bike. I said, do you ride your bike every Saturday morning? Yeah. So his insulin, he couldn't release sugar. So his sugars were going low, and then once he got to his fat stores, his body could release a ton of sugar, so he got fat adapted basically, right? So it was good news. We're like, oh, that's great. Your body's able to release the sugar now to burn it, So sometimes we see those things, and the sugar is just a marker of what insulin's doing. So we don't look at the absolute level necessarily. It's if it spikes every time you eat, we say, okay, we're eating too many carbs, we gotta cut back. And once we do, like for me, Jason Fung helped me out a lot. And when I first started, my sugars every day dropped for the first week, and then they started going up, up, up. I'm like, Jason, something's wrong. He goes, are you eating carbs? I said, no. He goes, okay, your body's doing what it's supposed to do. It's releasing that Krispy Kreme from 2 years ago to burn. Don't worry about it, right? So that's why we have these experts to talk about, say, why is my body acting this way? And it's doing its normal thing.
And I'll just say, as far as devices go, I'll tell you right now, not a single one of them is accurate. Okay, so the numbers don't mean anything until you look at them over time. What you're looking for is what are the changes over a period of time. So like you said, a point measurement doesn't tell you anything. So getting on the scale, looking at your watch, whatever it may be, and going, oh my gosh, the world is ending. That's what's happened over the past 6 weeks. If you're tracking, why are you tracking? Are you doing it with intention of checking something and making an adjustment? If you're doing it just because you think you need to, and you're giving value to that number, that's the wrong reason to track. Right? It's the trends. Are you moving in the direction that you said you want to go? That's what we're doing for.
I can tell you with that Lumen device, I did extensive testing on it myself. It's basically a fancy breath meter. The problem with testing your ketone for breath is they're very difficult to use the right way. The ketones are in the bottom of your lungs, which means, or the acetone, which means you have to get all of the air out of your lungs, and then whatever's left, put that in the device. So they're very difficult to use the right way. You're better off with a keto motion. Okay, it'll test the fat, but they're hard to use, and you need a good one.
I want to reiterate something that came up. I think it was in your. When we were talking about stress, I have clients that wear the continuous glucose monitor, and some of them allow it to alarm on my phone if it goes up for accountability. And so I texted this client of mine, Kristen, and I said, why? What did you just eat? She said, I didn't eat anything. I had an argument with my husband. So I want to reiterate that things like that can cause your blood sugar to go up. Now, she uses that all the time in her relationship. No, don't. I'm
My glucose goes up when Rachel walks in the door after her day down. It also goes up when I take a hot shower. So if you want a CGM and your doctor won't write you a prescription, tastermonial.com.
What?
Tastermonial.com. Tastermonial.com. They will write you a prescription and call it to your pharmacy for $39. Wow. And if you get, I think it's 6 months, it's like $100 for 6 months worth of prescription. It's cheaper than a copay to your doctor. Okay? And they're trying to do a bunch of tests. It does not include the CGM. That is the cost of them to call the prescription. Their goal is they're trying to create an app where this app, where you can go into the store, scan any food item, and you will come up with trends on what the average glucose is when people eat that product. So they're developing an app where you can scan it, and when you eat something, that is their goal. So they're offering these prescriptions. You answer a few health questions, and they call in the prescription for you, if your doctor won't do it for you. But then guess what? You know, we've got Dexcom is coming out with an over-the-counter later on this year. So that's a step in the right direction. Rachel decided to hand me this one.
Hey, you took the mic.
With a lower LDL, how are sex hormones affected, or any others, for Dr. Dom?
I got nothing.
So the question is if you are pharmacologically lowering LDL. I guess that's a question. It'd probably be important to, like, statin drugs will lower LDL ubiquitously across all tissues. So, and that cholesterol synthesis is made in the tissues, and the hormones are made sort of de novo in particular tissues. And statin drugs will inhibit steroidogenesis, and so that's important to consider. But if your circulating blood levels of LDL are low, that should not significantly impact steroid synthesis unless there's a huge demand for that steroid. For example, like you're, going through puberty or under a lot of stress, and you can't make enough cortisol because you'll start pulling from the circulating cholesterol. But your tissues actually have the capacity to make cholesterol. But if you take a statin drug, that would impair that ability to make cholesterol at the level of the tissue. I think I might be answering the question, but I'm not really sure.
When you take something that is designed to increase ketones, and it does, should your body start to produce ketones after this?
No. Well, okay, so an exception to that, is medium chain triglyceride. When you consume them, they go to the liver via hepatic portal circulation and stimulate fat oxidation in the liver. The more you do that, the better your body's ability to drive ketogenesis. You're almost training your liver to make ketones. So in the context of like ketogenic fats, like MCT, which is actually sold on, it's on clinicaltrials.gov as a ketone supplement, then that would, if you consume a large dose of a ketone ester, and this is why I don't recommend ketone esters or even 1,3-butanediol, which is being sold as a ketone ester, that spikes your ketones up very quickly, and then you have a counter-regulatory response. When the ketones go up, that stimulates your pancreas to release a little bit of insulin, and then actually shut off your ketone production. Although we don't see that with the ketone salts, because salt tends to delay gastric absorption, or it's that relative change that our bodies seem to be very sensitive to. But anytime you spike up your ketones a delta or a change of 2 millimolar or more, then that seems to, in many people, elicit a counter-regulatory response that's not favorable in my mind. But we do that in the lab, but we do that for specific, conditions like oxygen toxicity or maybe seizures and things like that. Then large doses of ketone esters, but for the general population, I don't think they should be bolusing ketone. I know a lot of athletes are doing it, and I think there's a lot of hype around it. And you'll notice, like, I didn't really talk about ketones and performance per se, except for extreme environments. So I'm not a huge fan of using, lots of exogenous ketones. I think that they're like any other fuel. Like, you can add, a little bit of creatine monohydrate and just add it to top off your energy, for example, during the day, but they should not represent like a primary fuel source during exercise.
I'll do it if I'm writing a paper or I have to get a project done by the next day. I'll take some at night sometimes just to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think we don't need to spend a lot of money on large doses of ketone esters, and I think maybe it could be counterproductive. Yeah. But I bump up ketones throughout the day with ketone salts or MCT, and I think this is fine.
Just one thing to throw into that is, if you're trying to get your body better at making ketones, do the things that make your body better at making ketones. Right? Exercise, don't eat processed food, drop the carbs. every system in our body only gets better when we ask it to get better. So if we're constantly interrupting that process, guess what has to happen?
Yeah.
It's got to start over.
And don't eat unless you're physiologically hungry. Don't be afraid of fasting, you know? I mean, because if I'm not eating, my body's going like, well, dang, nab, I'm going to take that little bit here of fat. She's got some over here. Yeah. I keep telling it not up. Anyway, never mind.
If you can eat cold chicken, you're hungry.
Yeah.
Nurse Cindy, you talked about how your sister was instrumental in you learning about keto. This person is asking about like how, when you recognize a friend or family member is metabolically unhealthy, what's your advice for sharing this with them, particularly if they don't want to hear it?
I did not want to hear it from her. So she sent me a video, a third, it was one step removed, and asked me if I would just listen to it and would I let her know what I thought from a nursing point of view. It's a really hard thing. My entire family jumped on the keto bandwagon 8 years ago, and the vast majority of them have gone back and have gained all the weight back on because it's wrapped up in the emotions, it's wrapped up in what am I bearing under that food, the compulsion, that bliss point. There's so much going on. I think be a lighthouse instead of a foghorn. Just let them see. Bring a keto casserole or something when you go there, or make a keto treat. Don't push it. You try to jam something down my throat, I'm going to choke on it. Don't push me. Yeah, I do. Yeah. So I think just be a lighthouse. Yeah.
And if I can add on, if they're not ready and they don't want to, it's not happening.
Yeah, and there's tension.
My father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer in August of 22, and he fought us tooth and nail to feed him keto. And he allowed other people to influence him to not allow us to feed him keto. They would rather give him Popeye's chicken noodle soup, and pasta and pizza. If they don't want to do it, it's not happening. So don't upset yourself and get yourself stressed out, because I gave myself shingles doing that.
And I will say that I never talk to any doctor or person in my life anymore about keto or low carb. They'll say, how have you lost that weight? I dropped all the whites, white sugar, white bread, all the things that are, really certainly donuts. And I just make it like I go to green leafy veg and meat and healthy fats, and I leave it at that. And then they're not like immediately concerned I'm going to die.
I'll just add to that. FOMO is a big deal. Fear of missing out. If you're doing it and you're living your best life and you're consistent when they pressure you not to, and they know that you're committed and that you have a goal and you're going to reach it, they will wonder, why is she doing that? Why is he doing that? What's the big deal? Make your life a big deal, and then they'll come to you.
Shameless plug. Look at the title of our talk on Thursday, and we address some of that.
With that, I would say time is on your side. Given enough time, every single objection falls to the side. And people who are vehemently against it in the beginning, over time they see a consistency in you that they don't see in the rest of the world. And that's what draws them to it, and is much better than preaching to them. Let them go, and then be the light.
I got one more thing. Okay. Just to add to that a little bit, living your best life, doing this lifestyle, or doing any lifestyle that you're following to improve your quality of life, your language matters. When you talk to your family and say, no, I can't have that, does that make them want to do what you're doing? No. When you commiserate with somebody that's close to you about how much you miss cheesecake, does that tell them that you're happy about doing what you're doing? Okay? The words and the language that you use make a difference. If you're trying to impact people in your life, show them that they should do it too.
I think the same goes with religion, right? If you're in everyone's face everywhere you go, people are like, I don't want to sit next to that person. I don't want to hear it. I'm not at that
Go
point.
the other way.
And at some point when they come and ask you, like, hey, I see your life's pretty good. But if you're a jerk to everyone, it's not going to help the situation, right? So a lot of people here that I've talked to, like the husband said, I'm doing it. I'm in. And then sooner or later, the rest of the family or the wife does it, then the husband follows. So it's really just that consistency, and when people are feeling better and when you see a change. Like that's a testimony. Like when you hear these stories, it's so exciting. You go, wow, maybe I can do those things. And that's why with our practices now, we're using group meetings like this, like on Zoom, and someone could tell their story. I'm struggling, I'm having a hard week, and other people say, oh yeah, I was there 2 months ago, you know, and so we can help each other get through those times. And that community is so huge.
Yeah, that's so good.
Dr. Lenzkes, is a keto low-carb diet healthy for a morbidly obese child that's aged between 13 and 17 years old?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's one of these things where it's just so crazy because we've gotten to that point. Why are we at that point? Right now, Tro and I were just talking about that. The new guidelines are saying gastric bypass surgery for a 12-year-old, 9-year-old, and the drugs like Ozempic. And you're like, really? Do you know how much that costs a month? $1,200 a month, right? Plus all the other side effects. Plus, we don't have long-term data, so to recommend this for kids is insane. It's certain things we have to have long-term data to make long-term recommendations. So when we start seeing these kids, we realize, gosh, if we can work on the lifestyle and stress and realize why. Is it the stress that's happening? Is it that they're not sleeping? How do we intervene in a way? But I don't know anyone who died from taking away Doritos, right? We may not be happy, but we're seeing dramatic. There was a movie with Jason Fung was The Magic Pill.
Yes.
And you see this girl with autism that was just struggling, and they changed her diet and she got better. And so out of that, my sister-in-law said, hey, maybe we'll try that. What do you think? I'm like, yeah, give it a shot. And that dramatic changes in her. And you see that and go, wow, how many kids? Then you feel sad for the kids who just don't have that knowledge. Like you said, lack of knowledge is death, right? Like, let's educate.
Yeah.
It's really important how you present it when you're putting a child on keto. As I mentioned, my daughter, when she was 9, we came to her and said, we're going to change your diet. She was not happy about that. But as a parent, I presented it like this. I can't know of something that might help you and not try it. And if it doesn't, we won't do it. But I have to. And it was all about her health and her wellness. We can't make kids feel bad about how much they weigh. Again, you know, we're talking about eating disorders and all these things. There's issues there. But if a child has gotten obese, it's some of it's what they're eating, but if you watch their behavior, they already have those little seeds, little branches growing, those strongholds. So we have to be really careful. How do we present that to the child to protect them and let them know they are okay, but we want to help them.
What is the impact of sleeping pills on your brain?
Dr. L, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a big, sleep deprivation is a huge problem, but the thing is we throw a pill at it, and then the problem is once you come off the sleeping pill, anyone who's been on Ambien or some of these other meds, it's really hard to come off it, right? So you have a rebound sleep problem. So there's things like melatonin that we're using a lot more. My PA now, she's expert in hormone replacement, and she's having unbelievable results just titrating up that dose slowly to get you to a point where you're sleeping again, because it a lot of times has to do with nutrition, diet, the gut microbiome. There's some probiotics that help with sleep. There's so many things we can do, but the problem is when we look at the brain waves, you don't get this refreshing sleep. You sleep, but you wake up exhausted when you're taking Benadryl and all these other drugs to sleep, and you say, why is it that I'm not sleeping? And then we come back to this whole thing of stress, are we taking stimulants all day? Are we eating a lot of processed foods with inflammation in the brain? So many people, as we talked about before, when they change their lifestyle, their sleep, their focus, their attention gets better, or they can do better, And so there's some non-pharmacologic approaches. There's a product, I don't have any financial interest, but it's called AlphaStim, alpha-stim.com, and I've been using that with patients. It puts their brain into an alpha state, so it shuts them down like a prayer, meditation, yoga would do, or even, steam bath. My wife and I have been messing with cold plunges, and I've slept great after that. So it's like, you think that would wake you up, but I go right to sleep. So, and I go right to sleep anyway, so I guess that's not a very good, but it didn't mess up my sleep, put it that way, but I woke up really refreshed the next morning. But, we're subjectively seeing, I've seen people wearing their Whoop watches or Oura rings, and their deep sleep gets better. And I think the other thing is watching alcohol intake. That is a disaster for the sleep cycle. So, just things like that where we shouldn't have to take a drug to sleep all the time. But we're stressed when we're not sleeping, so it's one of those darn cycles we have to break. And so lifestyle, I'd love to talk to the coaches here, have any recommendations about, some lifestyle things. Sometimes just setting that alarm early and just getting up and forcing yourself up. And then sooner or later your body starts to shift that sleep cycle. The other big thing is, as I talked about, was this shifted sleep where people go to bed at 2 a.m. And a lot, like if you look at the night nurses versus the day nurses, dramatic difference in weight. because sleep cycle being off, you eat to stay awake, stay awake when you're driving, things like that. So I think, it really has to do with our stress levels and lifestyle, and exercise plays a huge role, especially early morning, light exposure, all these things this red light people are talking about.
Yeah.
But, unfortunately, we want the quick fix and it's a pill.
Right. Yeah. Just a really quick calm magnesium supplement.
Yeah.
Some people just need something like that. You don't even have to do anything other than that. And honestly, this is the biggest thing. Don't have your phone in your room where you're sleeping. People don't want to give that up. They say, I use it for my alarm. I went and bought like an old-fashioned wind-up alarm clock. It makes a difference. Because if you do tend to wake up during the night and you have trouble falling back to sleep, the first thing people do is they pick up their phone, they start scrolling, and they prolong the time before they go back to sleep. So there's some, do the simplest thing first and then try other things. Like if magnesium works, you don't need to do melatonin. You just start with the simple things.
I think we have room for one more question, and it's to Dr. Dom. If we don't call on insulin long term, will we lose the ability to?
Call on it?
Oh, I think I know. So we're talking about physiological insulin resistance. So the idea, I guess, is that if you're living in a protracted state of nutritional ketosis where your insulin, many people I see it go down to 10 and it stays in the 2 to 3 range when they really dial in. And what they may see correspondingly is a slight elevation in fasting glucose, and sometimes even like immeasurable, going from 80s, 90s to even 110 in the morning. So, and I get what Brian was talking about too with maybe the guy exercising, is that if your insulin is really low, you're burning lots of fat for fuel, and then that has kind of a glucose sparing effect. So with people with CGMs, I can kind of see that they get a bump up, but it's small, but insulin's low, but glucose goes up slightly because there are such high fat oxidizers because insulin is low that it's sparing glucose. So I guess the question to ask would be, how does this impact other important biomarkers of metabolic health? And should we be concerned about that? Because it is an altered physiological state. I think it's probably okay, but I also think that it may be ideal to be more metabolically flexible, and perhaps even to add some fruits and vegetables in here and there if you're not using ketosis to metabolically manage a disorder, that's responsive to ketosis. So it might be good to just add small amounts of carbs, which I have done, maybe 50, 60, 70 grams of carbs a day. And I think that has not really changed my insulin much, but made me more insulin sensitive and dropped my glucose a little bit. It's kind of a roundabout way to answer the question, but yeah.
Perfect. So before we let you, sorry, Dr. Lenzkes.
I was just going to say, we looked at that actually, because it's not insulin resistance that we're getting. What's happening is if you eat carbs and your body's not used to it, just think of the pancreas sending all the workers home. They go, look, I don't need you. This person's not eating a lot of sugar. Then what happens is you have to recruit those people to come back, and it takes time. So that first day you may get an elevated sugar spike, but the next day if you get the same thing, it's less and less because your body builds up so you're more insulin sensitive. It's not an insulin resistant in that state, but it's just like alcohol. If you don't drink at all and then you go out and drink with the guys at the pool all day, you're gonna really, but if you drink every single day, it doesn't make a difference, right? You get used to it, like this drinking shape type thing. So yeah, there's different thoughts on that, but that's what it looks like. We see that sugar spike, because if we're worried about insulin sensitivity, we want the insulin to be as low as we can. So if the insulin's staying low and our sugar goes up a little bit, it's not a big deal transiently.
Okay, before we let you go, I have the most crucial question of the evening, and that is, how do you guys like your eggs? How do you like your eggs fixed? If you could just go down the panel and let us know. How do you like your eggs?
Boiled eggs dipped in hot sauce.
I gotta try that.
When my wife makes over easy, awesome.
Runny over medium.
Scrambled in bacon grease.
Yes.
Basically all the above, yeah. I am not selective.
Can we give it up for our speakers?
So we